Ichiju Makoto was an ordinary office worker who found himself working overtime as usual, and just as he was barely catching the last train home, he was suddenly attacked. He couldn't understand why this was happening to him, as he had worked, done overtime, and taken the train just like any other day. Lying injured in a park, he realized he had been mugged, a victim of what's known as oyajigari, and as if his situation wasn't dire enough, it began to snow while he weakly called for help. Makoto reflected on his difficult life, burdened by his father's debts which he spent years working hard to repay, finally clearing them when he was 28. He had endured the employment ice age, power harassment, and unpaid overtime, and even after becoming free from debt, he never managed to find a girlfriend and was now 38, desperately clinging to life and not wanting to die. As he lay there pleading for someone to help him, a horrible bitter taste suddenly spread throughout his mouth. He vaguely wondered if it was hair tonic, but a voice informed him it was a potion. When Makoto came to, he found himself looking at a young girl dressed like a witch, and his first dazed thought was to ask if it was Halloween. The girl, however, told him to get up because his injuries were healed, and he soon learned he was in a place she called a dungeon. She explained that this was reality and suggested he might have been summoned directly if he didn't understand what was going on. This girl, Sato Yuka, mentioned she found him covered in blood and initially thought he was one of them. A still confused Makoto introduced himself as Ichiju Makoto. He tried to explain his situation, recounting how he was attacked in the park after work, but Yuka seemed unfazed. Feeling disrespected, Makoto insisted he was 38 and that she should show some respect for her elders. To prove his age, he showed her his driver's license, but Yuka dismissed it, thinking it belonged to his father. It was then Makoto noticed his clothes felt baggy and his shoes didn't fit, prompting him to ask for a mirror. Yuka reluctantly handed him one, mentioning her mother had given it to her. Looking at his reflection, Makoto was shocked to see he had become significantly younger. As he tried to process this, Makoto attempted to light a cigarette but started coughing, wondering if his newfound youth had also cleaned his lungs. Yuka, annoyed by his smoking, reminded him that she had used a precious potion on him and that he should be more polite, implying she was now older than him in this new context. She urged him that they needed to get out of the dungeon. After they had been walking for about an hour, Makoto, finally addressing her properly as Sato Yuka, asked her how she ended up there. She explained that about a month prior, her entire classroom suddenly went white, and she, along with roughly 20 of her classmates, was teleported to another world, specifically to a place called Valis Kingdom. There, the king informed them they had been summoned by the envoys of the gods. Yuka continued her story, stating they were told that if they defeated the immortal king, they might be able to return home, which led to everyone joining the knights. However, the king didn't seem to provide much support for them. During their endeavors, Yuka got separated from her group, lost her map, ran out of food, and eventually used her only remaining potion to heal Makoto. She then revealed that she saved him because, as a mage, she needed a tank or a fighter to protect her. Makoto, whose character sheet displayed him as a level 1 spiritualist with a subclass of martial artist, was dismayed by his low stats, particularly his HP of 12 and strength of 9. Yuka knew his stats because of her appraisal skill and even mentioned his rare soul dash skill, which surprised him. Their conversation quickly devolved into bickering when he felt she was nitpicking his words. Their argument was cut short by the appearance of a large zombie, causing both Makoto and Yuka to scream in terror. Regaining his composure, Makoto told Yuka to prepare for battle, and she began chanting a spell, invoking Lion Kesta Agata and Perioris, culminating in the word manifest, as she launched a magical attack. Makoto was initially amazed by the display of magic, but the zombie, though hit, continued to advance. Yuka urged Makoto to draw its attention for one more shot, but his legs gave out from fear or weakness, and he found himself screaming for her to use more magic. The zombie then grabbed Makoto, who struggled and yelled for it to let him go, while Yuka desperately tried to chant another spell. Overwhelmed, Makoto berated himself for relying on Yuka, who was just a high school girl, feeling a familiar sense of unfairness wash over him. As the zombie bore down on him, he cried out, questioning why he always ended up in such terrible situations. Memories of his miserable past life flashed before his eyes, and he screamed that he didn't want to die, not even in this new world. Suddenly, a powerful force erupted from Makoto, striking the zombie and causing it to disintegrate, much to Yuka's surprise, who thought he was not bad at all. Makoto, realizing he could control this new power which he identified as spirit magic, commanded the remnants of the zombie to disappear before checking if Yuka was alright. Makoto apologized for not being much help during the fight. Yuka, adjusting her hat, reassured him that his injuries would probably heal soon and asked if this had been his first real battle. He admitted it wasn't, just as a voice only he could hear announced, "Level up," and that he had received 1 bonus point. His stats improved to level 2, with HP 13, Strength 10, Agility 12, and Magic 18. Simultaneously, the bite marks on his body healed, and the pain vanished. Yuka explained that only he could hear the envoy's voice. Makoto found the system remarkably game-like. Yuka, who was level 5, mentioned that they could spend points to acquire skills by visiting a church. Rummaging through the zombie's dropped backpack, Makoto found a pair of boots that fit him perfectly, a welcome find since his old shoes were now too large for his younger body. Yuka also informed him that the night squad they were supposed to be part of was divided into combat and support teams. Later, Makoto questioned Yuka about his earlier outburst where he commanded the zombie to disappear, leading to another round of bickering when she called him useless. He retorted that she'd be cute if she wasn't so short-tempered, but she dismissed his comment. Eventually, Makoto suggested they should focus on escaping the dungeon while minimizing combat. When he asked how they could determine their current location, Yuka stated they were on the 10th basement floor and that the dungeon's structure, currently resembling a cave, changed depending on the floor. Hearing they were so deep underground, Makoto sighed, "This is gonna be tough." Yuka groaned at his choice of words, finding it embarrassing and accusing him of acting like a light novel protagonist or a chuyuni. Makoto, bewildered, insisted it was a perfectly normal phrase, wondering if he was experiencing a generation gap. Takuya Kimura desperately fleeing through a dark, cavernous area, his breath coming in heavy pants as he realizes his pursuers are rapidly closing in on him, leaving him with no alternative but to turn and confront them. As 2 large, monstrous figures approach, Takuya questions how events led to this dire situation and, with a shout of frustration, introduces himself as Takuya Kimura, warning the creatures to stay back. Despite his defiance, Takuya is struck by one of the monsters, crying out in pain while a flashback reveals the moment his entire class was summoned to this new world, an event that had initially filled him with excitement, making him feel like the protagonist of a fantastical tale. Back in the present struggle, he continues to fend off the creature. Heavily injured and bleeding from his face, Takuya laments that zombies, which he believed were weak, are proving to be incredibly strong, and he wonders about the whereabouts of everyone else. He reflects on his unfulfilled potential, noting that he never had a chance to shine and the role assigned to him was insignificant, all while enduring the ongoing assault. Another flashback shows Takuya alongside Cookie, a prominent figure in their class, and other classmates. Cookie had expressed reliance on Takuya, proposing they defeat the undead king together and return to their world, a sentiment that had brought Takuya happiness. However, the harsh reality of this new world, far from being a game or a light novel, becomes starkly apparent as he faces 3 menacing, shadowy figures. Overcome with terror, Takuya is attacked again, a creature biting his shoulder, and he questions his prior ability to fight without fear, wondering if it stemmed from an unquestioning knightly resolve. In profound agony and despair, he then questions his faith in Cookie, someone he barely knew before their arrival in this world, just before being overwhelmed by the monstrous assailants. The narrative then shifts to the present, focusing on an ex-middle-aged man, now in a younger body and appearing in a suit, accompanied by a high school girl named Yuka, who is dressed like a witch. They are presented as an unlikely pair trying to escape a dungeon. Yuka initiates an attack by chanting a spell, Ryuno Kesta Agata, Unending Barrioris, which materializes as a magic bullet aimed at approaching zombies. Her companion, the man, simultaneously unleashes his own magic, Ignite, causing black flames to erupt from his hand. The man's fire attack strikes a zombie, but he observes that its effect is still unstable. Seeing this, Yuka decides she must act and casts Magic Bullet. Manifest, once more, this time with a seemingly more potent visual effect. Her magic bullet hits its target, and she briefly wonders if she has succeeded, but the damaged zombie remains standing. Meanwhile, the man is engaged in combat with another zombie, and with a determined cry of, "Die!" he delivers a devastating kick to its head, completely destroying it. After the battle, Yuka remarks that their actions feel like robbery, to which the man responds that it's time to collect loot. A system notification announces a level up for him, detailing his new stats and bonus points. As he gathers items from a chest, he concedes that it indeed resembles robbery, retracting his earlier thought. Yuka expresses her disappointment with the meager haul, wishing for better weapons to ease their struggles. Her companion, feeling exhausted, suggests they retreat to an open area to rest for the day. Yuka then sets up a protective barrier by placing 4 special needles at 4 corners. The man, having just established the barrier, tells her she can at least lay out a blanket. As they settle down, he sighs about their 3 days of aimless wandering, and Yuka voices her growing fear that they might never find a way out. The man notices Yuka sniffing the air and asks what is wrong. She complains about wanting a bath or at least a shower. He gestures to a water flask, a magical item capable of producing unlimited water, and suggests she could wipe herself down. Yuka adamantly refuses to do so in his presence, worried he might peek, a notion he quickly denies. She also laments the lack of a map and the absence of basic supplies like paper and pencils. A moment later, Yuka is startled when her companion mentions he can see her, implying he saw her underwear due to the way she was sitting. He clarifies it was unintentional, but she calls him a pervert and throws something at him. Flustered, Yuka abruptly informs him that she already has someone she likes, a person named Cookie, whom she describes as rich, handsome, smart, athletic, and possessing a great personality, emphasizing that Cookie is on an entirely different level compared to him. Her companion simply acknowledges her statement, and Yuka adds that money is important, a detail he finds unusual in her description of a love interest. He then asks if her sudden declaration means she is warning him not to make any advances, finding her timing rather odd. Yuka confirms his interpretation. He comments on how impressive it was that Cookie had organized their classmates after they were transported to this new world, and Yuka agrees. Her companion then states that he wouldn't do anything to create an enemy in their current precarious situation. Annoyed, Yuka tells him to eat something and go to sleep, once again throwing an object at him, prompting him to ask her to stop. Later, the man seems contemplative, murmuring about wanting a warm meal because their current provisions are dry and tasteless, before dismissing it as just a keyword to hype himself up. Yuka, overhearing him, asks about the Ignite incantation he used earlier. He explains it's a personal keyword. She criticizes him for acting like a chunibu even after 3 days in the dungeon. He apologizes, but she warns him that such dramatic displays, even with a barrier up, could attract unwanted attention. Touching a glowing mark on his hand, the man expresses that being a spirit sorcerer feels somewhat underwhelming. Yuka disagrees, pointing out that his fire magic is unstable and lacks long-range capability. When he asks if she thinks he's using it correctly, she admits she was too preoccupied with her own challenges to observe. He then wonders aloud if she has any advice on how to use his abilities better. Yuka suggests that since his secondary job is a martial artist, he should simply resort to punching their enemies, an idea he quickly rejects, stating it's because it's frightening. Yuka calls his fear pathetic for a man. He responds that, in contrast, Yuka is amazing for her bravery. He explains his desire to maintain a safety margin because, unlike a game, their current reality offers no saves or continues. Yuka dismisses his compliments, saying they won't achieve anything. He then shares his honest opinion that they are in a genuine fight to the death, acknowledging that while their initial experiences were rough, Yuka's ability to avoid freezing up in fear is impressive. This revelation shocks Yuka, who hadn't realized the true stakes of their battles. Upset, Yuka exclaims that his perception is wrong and that she cannot entrust her life to someone who seems to have lost their grip on reality, urging him to understand the difference between a game and their current situation. She confesses she was unaware they were fighting for their lives and, while not fully understanding it, had never found their circumstances strange. Her companion, perplexed by her reaction, decides there's no point dwelling on it and states that their immediate focus should be on escaping the dungeon, for which they need to rest. The following day, the man checks on Yuka, asking if she is okay. When she inquires what he means, he explains his concern that she might freeze up in combat now that she understands they are in a life-or-death struggle. Yuka believes she will be fine. He reiterates that their primary goal is to stay alive, meaning reckless, all-out attacks are not an option. Yuka then comments that his attitude is terrible, and when he asks for specifics, she concedes that perhaps she is the weird one and that it's just her nature, feeling foolish for even asking. Suddenly, her companion interrupts, telling her to wait as he smells blood, and urges her to move carefully. Alarmed, Yuka asks what is happening. Kimura became aware of an unusual smell that was more than just blood, while Makoto observed with a focused gaze. They found themselves in a desolate, snow-covered area. The scene then shifted to a horrifying moment where a girl, whom Kimura identified as Yuka, was being viciously mauled by a zombie-like creature. As Kimura engaged another monstrous figure, Makoto called out his name, Kimura-ku, with evident concern. Kimura, determined, announced his intention for a preemptive strike. While Kimura battled the creature, Makoto, from a short distance, began to chant a spell, invoking stones to become projectiles to pierce her enemies. She shouted to get Kimura's attention before finally manifesting a magic bullet. However, her first spell narrowly missed its intended target, flying past Kimura and exploding nearby, which startled him. The creature Kimura was fighting remained standing. Undeterred, Makoto continued her incantation as the creature lunged at Kimura. He skillfully dodged and countered with a cry of "Ignite!" striking the monster. The creature shrieked from Kimura's blow. Focused on dispatching it quickly before any other threats emerged, Kimura lunged again for a decisive attack. He struck the creature repeatedly, but it stubbornly refused to fall, causing Kimura to curse its resilience. The creature, with its gruesome face, seemed to convey a profound hatred for the living, a sentiment Kimura acknowledged he could understand. With a powerful punch that appeared to tear straight through the monster, Kimura expressed his shared understanding of its feelings, seemingly destroying it. Immediately after, Makoto launched another magic bullet, which detonated dangerously close to Kimura, making him exclaim in surprise. Kimura, somewhat annoyed, asked Makoto if she was already all right and requested that she give him a heads up next time. Makoto confidently retorted, asking who he thought she was and stating she had made sure not to hit him. Kimura chuckled, referring to her as just a foul-mouthed high school girl. Their attention then turned to the other creature, the one that had attacked Yuka, which was surprisingly still moving. Kimura affirmed that they needed to take care of it. Suddenly, this remaining creature began a grotesque transformation, emitting strange sounds. Kimura wondered aloud what was happening, while Makoto nervously admitted she didn't know. The creature let out a terrifying roar as its metamorphosis completed, revealing it had evolved into a more formidable ghoul. Kimura exclaimed that it had evolved and that no one had informed him about such a possibility, noting the zombie had reached its level cap. Makoto, however, entered a state of intense concentration, once again chanting her spell to create a piercing projectile, and Kimura observed her complete focus. With unwavering concentration, Makoto unleashed her magic bullet. Kimura, watching her, commented on how truly amazing she was as the spell struck the ghoul directly. Both Kimura and Makoto briefly believed they had succeeded, but as the smoke cleared, the ghoul emerged, roaring defiantly and seemingly unharmed, leaving Kimura in shock. The ghoul charged, and Kimura yelled for Makoto to cover him as he rushed forward to confront the beast, managing to dodge its initial onslaught. However, the ghoul's long hair or tendrils ensnared Kimura, and he was violently slammed into the ground. Seeing Kimura in grave danger, Makoto quickly prepared another magic bullet. As the ghoul continued its assault on the downed Kimura, he cried out, "Yuka!" perhaps in his distress or as a memory of the other victim, just before Makoto launched her attack. Despite being under attack, Kimura managed to seize the ghoul's head, determined to end the fight, and landed a strong blow. His attack connected, and he questioned if that would be enough, but the ghoul swiftly retaliated, throwing him to the ground once more, causing Kimura to curse in frustration. The ghoul then smashed Kimura into the ground again. Battered, Kimura realized this creature was on a completely different level than ordinary zombies, possessing combat intelligence that made him question the extent of its evolution. With the ghoul pinning him down and about to deliver a fatal bite, Kimura struggled. Makoto, seeing Kimura in extreme peril, softly called his given name, Makoto, as if to focus herself or in deep concern, and began a new incantation, calling upon raging flames. Levitating slightly, Makoto then unleashed a powerful flame bullet, commanding it to incinerate her enemy. The fiery projectile engulfed the ghoul that was on top of Kimura. The ghoul shrieked in agony as it was consumed by the flames, its form disintegrating while Kimura managed to pull himself free. Makoto watched with concern as the ghoul's burning remains fell apart. Kimura stood up, but Makoto suddenly cried out his given name, Makoto, in alarm. Kimura looked down to see his left arm was horribly injured, possibly severed or burned away, leaving him staring at his grievous wound in shock. Makoto stood heavily injured, his arm mangled and bloodied, while Yuka urgently shouted his name, telling him they needed to run. However, Makoto, wheezing from his injuries, questioned where they could possibly flee, as the terrifying angel-like monster loomed before them. Yuka wondered if he was about to make a noble sacrifice, but Makoto dismissed the idea, stating that such an action would lead to both their deaths. She then questioned if his previous attack was his full power or if he had suddenly awakened a new ability in their dire situation, and Makoto confirmed that they had no option left but to go all out against their foe. With a grim chuckle, Makoto remarked that he wasn't some typical shonen manga protagonist who would miraculously power up, and Yuka acknowledged this, dryly noting his age. As he spoke, Makoto observed his injured hand, which began to emanate a dark, ominous energy. He contemplated his next move while his hand became further enveloped in this strange power. Nearby, the angel-like monster also seemed to be recovering, and Yuka noted that its flames were unstable, realizing she had to act quickly or face defeat. Makoto then instructed Yuka to attack the monster with the same flame ability she had used before. Yuka expressed doubt, suggesting her previous hit only landed due to the element of surprise, but Makoto urged her to simply get the attack close enough. Reluctantly, Yuka complied and began to chant a powerful incantation, calling upon ancient words to fuel her magic. She unleashed a tremendous torrent of fire, commanding it to burn their enemy to ashes as the spell manifested with explosive force. The monster roared in response to the searing attack, while Makoto watched intently. As Yuka's flames engulfed the creature, Makoto wondered if its reaction was due to a fear of her fire or because its back had been burned in their earlier confrontation. The monster recoiled from the intense heat, and at that moment, Makoto experienced a revelation concerning the dark power now coalescing around his own fist. He declared that he finally understood what had been missing, referring to the wavering nature of his own power. He realized that these jet-black flames needed to be focused and gathered around his fist, and more importantly, he understood that the critical element he lacked was the true realization that their perilous situation was entirely real. Reflecting on his past hesitation, Makoto admitted that even when the monster seemed to be dying, he couldn't fully grasp the reality of the danger, lacking the resolve to truly confront his fear. With newfound determination, he lunged towards the creature, shouting for it to collapse as he prepared to deliver a decisive blow. His fist, empowered by the dark flames, struck the monster with immense force, creating a significant impact that signaled the end of the battle. In the aftermath, the monster lay defeated. Yuka, visibly shocked by their victory, asked if they had truly done it, while an exhausted Makoto looked on. Soon after, Makoto collapsed from his exertion, complaining of extreme tiredness. A notification appeared, informing him that he had leveled up to 10, receiving bonus points and increases to his stamina, strength, agility, and magic. Yuka approached him, and he acknowledged that their success was thanks to her efforts. Concerned, Yuka asked if he was all right. Makoto replied that his body felt sluggish and noted with some disgust that while his wounds had healed due to the level up, the profound fatigue remained, and the healing process itself looked quite grotesque. Seeing his lingering discomfort, Yuka decided there was no other way and prepared to use her magic. Makoto was surprised to learn she could use healing magic, a fact Yuka casually confirmed. She then channeled her power, and without any incantation, a healing light enveloped Makoto's arm. He thanked her, feeling somewhat better, and curiously asked if her instant healing was a skill since she hadn't chanted. Yuka then steered the conversation, telling him not to lie about his earlier hesitation when he faced the first zombie. She questioned his reluctance, and Makoto explained that the zombie had been someone he knew, a former classmate he had never even spoken to. Yuka pressed if that was the only reason, and Makoto affirmed it was. Makoto then brought up that Koki guy, asking about his fate. He mentioned that despite assurances from others, including someone named Hoshino-san, that it was safe, something had clearly gone wrong. Yuka, looking somberly at a nearby corpse, identified the deceased as Hoshino Kirara-san, who had been the class vice president and a leader among the girls. She then asked Makoto who Koki was. Makoto deflected the question with a slight chuckle, saying it was nothing and that he was merely thinking how difficult being a student seemed to be. As he walked away, Yuka watched him, then turned her gaze to Hoshino's body, murmuring about them killing each other. She concluded with a resolved thought that she, too, needed to make up her mind about something important. Yuka and his companion, a witch, were exploring a cave when skeletons suddenly appeared. Yuka unleashed a powerful fire spell called Ignition, which incinerated the attacking undead, while the witch supported him by casting Magic Bullet to dispatch more skeletons. After the encounter, Yuka noted that things were becoming easier now that he had surpassed level 10, and he subsequently leveled up to 11, gaining a bonus point and improved stats in HP, strength, agility, and magic power. The witch checked if he was alright, and Yuka confirmed he was fine, mentioning that although they would normally rest, they needed to continue their exploration due to their dwindling food supply, which was down to about 4 days' worth even with careful rationing. As they pressed on, they suddenly heard a noise and saw a person being pursued by a large group of skeletons. The witch asked Yuka if he knew the individual, but Yuka didn't recognize them, yet he insisted they needed to help quickly. He prepared a new original fire spell he called Pitch Black, and both he and the witch launched their attacks simultaneously, with the witch casting her Fire Bullet. Their combined magic created a significant explosion that wiped out the pursuing skeletons. They approached the person they had just saved, who was astounded by their powerful display. Yuka asked if the person was okay, and the individual, who introduced themselves as Tom, expressed immense gratitude for the rescue, remarking on how strong Yuka and the witch were. Yuka observed that Tom could understand Japanese, which Tom explained was one of the few gifts received from beings called messengers. Tom then suggested they move to a safer location to talk, and subsequently created a magical barrier that would prevent undead from detecting them. Inside the barrier, Tom confessed to being terrified, believing they were about to die. Yuka acknowledged their dire situation, and Tom mentioned having their own reasons for being in such a predicament. The witch then bluntly asked Tom if they knew a way to escape the dungeon. Tom confirmed they did, explaining that they explored dungeons for a living to support their little brother. Tom also shared some insights into dungeon exploration, revealing that knights typically send low-ranking individuals to scout ahead, often separating combat and support teams, and that people like Tom make and sell maps. Yuka realized they might have been set up as inexperienced adventurers, a common rookie-crushing tactic where newcomers are sent into dungeons without full disclosure of the dangers, a practice Tom said even knights employed. Tom advised them to be less trusting, stating that if they were fooled, it was their own fault, which shocked Yuka with the knight's ruthlessness. Yuka agreed that those who deceive others are the ones in the wrong. He then asked Tom if they could trade for a map and some food, also requesting a knife. Tom found their straightforward demands amusing but agreed, especially since they had saved Tom's life, and noted that Yuka and the witch didn't seem like bad people. However, Tom had one condition for providing the map and food: they had to promise to burn the map once they successfully escaped the dungeon. Yuka readily agreed. Tom was pleased that Yuka didn't immediately check the map's contents, calling him a good person, while Yuka expressed his trust that Tom wouldn't deceive those who had saved their life. Tom then showed them their current location on the map, pointing out a vertical shaft that led upwards. Tom warned them to be extremely careful as there was a massive, deep hole nearby, and falling into it would be fatal. Tom also emphasized that the Skeleton King's dungeon was incredibly vast, making their encounter a fortunate miracle. Yuka remarked that Tom hadn't seemed to be managing well earlier when they were being chased, but Tom insisted they could manage by continuously running if necessary. Yuka then questioned the feasibility of solo exploration if one couldn't rely on others, to which Tom admitted they usually managed. As Tom prepared to depart, Yuka thanked them for the map, food, and the knife. Before Tom left, Yuka held their hand and commented on how soft Tom's hands were for someone in their line of work. Flustered, Tom quickly said they had to go and ran off, but not before shouting back that if Yuka escaped the dungeon and went exploring again, they should hire Tom. Afterwards, Yuka asked the witch for her opinion. The witch noted that Tom's job was listed as thief, but their status was marked in blue, leading her to believe they could trust Tom. Yuka inquired about the blue status, and the witch explained that if someone kills another person outside of a declared war, their status turns red. Understanding this, Yuka asked what their next move was. The witch confidently stated that they would obviously move forward, now equipped with a map and food. Makoto and Yuka make their way through a dark and winding cave with jagged stalactites hanging from the ceiling. As they walk along the narrow path, Yuka breathes heavily from exhaustion, and Makoto notes that they have walked quite a long way. With a determined expression, he points ahead, announcing that they have arrived at the vertical shaft. They find themselves standing on a narrow cliffside ledge overlooking a vast and deep chasm, and Makoto realizes they have finally reached the 9th floor of the dungeon. He suggests they should rest for a bit, but Yuka, adjusting her glasses, stubbornly insists they should only stop after reaching the 9th floor, even though they are already there. Makoto points out that her legs are shaking and tells her not to push herself, so Yuka reluctantly agrees to wait while he checks if it's possible for them to climb up. Makoto carefully peers over the edge of the chasm, noticing a long rope hanging down, and realizes they will have to climb. From the echo, he can also hear the sound of water and wonders if there is a river far below them. He asks Yuka if she thinks they can cross, and while he looks uncertain, she states that they have no choice but to try. They begin to move carefully along the very narrow ledge, and Makoto advises Yuka to be cautious. Suddenly, a piece of the path creaks under his foot, startling him badly, which in turn scares Yuka, who jumps and tells him not to frighten her like that. After Makoto apologizes, they continue along the dangerous path. When they reach the rope, Makoto says that now they just have to climb up, and he steps toward it. He suggests he will climb after her, but Yuka becomes extremely flustered and embarrassed, and Makoto quickly understands that she is worried about him looking up her skirt while she climbs. Realizing his mistake, Makoto agrees to go first, noting that the incline seems a little gentler here, while Yuka tells him to hurry up, jokingly calling him a criminal. Makoto begins to climb the rope, and Yuka follows from below, scrambling to keep up. Just as she expresses her relief at finally making it to the 9th floor, she lets out a terrified scream. Ghostly, wraith-like creatures suddenly appear and swarm around her on the rope, and she cries out in fear, wondering what they are. As the apparitions cling to her, draining her energy, Yuka feels her strength fading and says she can't hold on. Higher up the rope, Makoto frantically reaches down, shouting for her to give him her hand. Yuka loses her grip on the rope and begins to fall, screaming that she can't hold on any longer while Makoto shouts her name in panic. With a determined look, he pushes off the cliff face. As Yuka tumbles into the darkness, Makoto yells in frustration and dives off the rope after her. In a swift motion, he catches her in midair, wrapping his arms around her while managing to grab hold of the rope with one hand, leaving them both swinging precariously over the abyss. Struggling to hold both their weight with one hand, Makoto jokes if he can let go, looking at his own strained hand. Yuka clings to him, threatening to haunt him if he lets go and promising to take him with her. Makoto asks if she can use her magic, but she admits she is too weak to even lift her arms, and he realizes his own body is starting to feel sluggish as well. Looking down at her with a serious expression, Makoto asks if he can take a gamble, explaining that he thinks there is a river far below them, and an exhausted Yuka tells him to do whatever he wants. As the ghostly creatures watch from above, Makoto promises to support her as much as he can, and he tells her not to die, to which she replies, "Same to you." With their decision made, Makoto lets go of the rope, and together, they fall into the darkness of the chasm below. As Makoto and Yuka plummet into the dark chasm, they are pursued by ghostly apparitions while Makoto holds Yuka tightly to shield her. They crash into a turbulent underground river with a massive splash, and the powerful current immediately begins to pull them apart. Makoto struggles to keep hold of Yuka, crying out as his leg is injured, and he watches in horror as the raging water carries them towards the edge of a massive, roaring waterfall. They are swept over the edge, falling into the misty abyss below. Sometime later, Yuka awakens on a desolate shore, coughing up water, and she is relieved to see Makoto nearby, who tells her he thought she was dead. They have landed in a vast underground lake, and as Yuka looks around, she notices that Makoto is bleeding profusely from his mouth and torso, realizing he must have protected her during the fall. Makoto dismisses her concern, saying he just hit a rock and asks if she can use healing magic to help him. Yuka apologetically explains that she cannot use healing magic and that her true skill is Soul Heal, which only heals the mind, while her ability to see statuses is just a side effect. As he tries to speak, Makoto suddenly coughs up a large amount of blood, alarming Yuka, and he grimly wonders if this is the end for him. Just as Yuka apologizes for their predicament, a menacing, heavily armored skeleton knight with a flowing black cape appears behind her, and it immediately launches a devastating attack that creates a massive explosion, sending them both flying. As the dust settles, the imposing figure of the upper-class skeleton stands ready for battle. Yuka screams at Makoto, asking why he isn't running and warning him that he will die, but he retorts that running would only delay the inevitable. He then decides to bet everything on the chance of leveling up if he can defeat their powerful foe, and he tells her to cover him as his fist begins to glow with dark energy. Agreeing to his plan, Yuka begins to chant a complex spell, while Makoto focuses his own magic, and she unleashes a magic bullet at the enemy. The skeleton knight, however, effortlessly deflects the magical projectile with its sword, leaving Yuka stunned by its power and speed. The knight lunges at Makoto, who desperately tries to evade and counter its attacks, but he is clearly outmatched and is soon kicked away. As he struggles, Yuka begins a new chant, calling upon flames to incinerate their enemy, and she unleashes a powerful flame bullet that engulfs the skeleton knight. Despite the intensity of the fire, the creature emerges from the blaze completely unharmed, and both Makoto and Yuka realize with dread that it must possess strong magic resistance. Unwilling to give up, Yuka decides she must at least slow it down and casts another spell, creating a binding formation of magical tendrils that wrap around the skeleton knight, momentarily restraining it. Seeing his chance, Makoto declares he will finish it, but the skeleton knight lets out a furious roar and shatters the magical bonds with ease. It charges forward again, and Yuka watches in horror as it sends Makoto flying with a powerful strike. The knight then stands over the defeated Makoto and begins to stomp on him relentlessly while Yuka cries out, desperately trying to think of something she can do to save him. With tears in her eyes, she resolves that she must act, remembering their shared struggle for survival and hardening her expression with grim determination. As the skeleton knight raises its sword to deliver the final blow to the battered Makoto, who weakly tells Yuka to run, it suddenly stops, surprised to find its legs ensnared by another binding spell. Yuka stands defiantly, her magic holding the powerful enemy in place, and she vows that she will return to the surface with Makoto. The magical ropes tighten around the knight, and Yuka screams for Makoto to act now. With a final, desperate roar, Makoto pushes himself up and channels all his remaining strength into one explosive punch that smashes into the skeleton's chest, shattering its armored torso and sending a shockwave through the cavern. The force of the impact throws Makoto backward, and he collapses to the ground, severely injured. Yuka rushes to his side, frantically asking how she can stop his bleeding, but Makoto, coughing blood, remarks that their gamble paid off even if it doesn't feel great. As Yuka tearfully begs him not to say such things, a chime sounds, and a notification announces that Makoto has leveled up to 20, with his wounds beginning to glow and heal. A relieved Yuka apologizes for everything, and Makoto weakly confirms that he has leveled up. In front of a massive, ancient palace deep within the dungeon, Makoto and Yuka find themselves facing a large army of heavily armored, high-tier skeletons. Makoto suggests that this is the dungeon boss's palace and that they have found a way to conquer it, but Yuka dismisses his optimism, pointing out that there is no way they can win against so many powerful enemies. Yuka asks what their plan is, and Makoto simply states that they will fight and take the skeletons down one by one. He explains that while observing the skeleton general they fought earlier, he noticed something important, and although Yuka asks if he can see their status, he admits he just made up the general title himself. Makoto then reveals his observation that the skeletons patrol in a set pattern, much like non-player characters in a game, and they do not seem to coordinate with each other since no reinforcements arrived during their last fight. He continues to explain their weakness, recalling that when they destroyed the first skeleton's armor, a red core was exposed, and breaking it caused the creature to vanish completely. With this knowledge, Makoto proposes a strategy where they lure the skeletons out individually so Yuka can restrain them with her magic, allowing him to break their armor with fireballs and destroy their cores. Though Yuka warns him not to get cocky, they agree to at least try his plan. Their strategy proves successful as Makoto destroys another skeleton, causing him to level up to 28 with significant stat increases. While he is relieved that they managed to win, Yuka is exasperated because they almost died in the process, but he reassures her that with her powerful magic, they can succeed. Now with a solid plan, Makoto declares he will grind levels until he can fight on his own, and after a moment of hesitation, Yuka agrees to trust him. She then complains about feeling sweaty, and Makoto points to the nearby underground lake, suggesting they eat and take a bath before continuing their fight. While Makoto rests on the shore, Yuka uses her skills to confirm the lake is safe from monsters before undressing and stepping into the water, enjoying the chance to finally relax. As she bathes, she warns Makoto not to peek, threatening to bind him and feed him to the monsters, and he calmly promises he won't. During their conversation, he admits he can see enemy skills, which annoys Yuka because he hadn't mentioned the skeleton's resistance to both physical and magical attacks. Makoto explains that his cautious nature isn't a sign of distrust, but Yuka retorts that she can't fully trust him because he acts dramatic, to which he reminds her he is 38. She brushes off his age and tells him not to die because his survival is linked to her own. Later, as she prepares to get out of the water, Yuka becomes flustered, thinking about how guys always stare at her but then blushing at the thought of Cookie seeing her. She tries to refocus, but her thoughts turn back to their recent fall, realizing with gratitude that Makoto had shielded her and that she never properly thanked him. Deciding he should also have a chance to wash, she is startled when Makoto suddenly trips and falls into the water right in front of her. As he emerges with a wide grin, admitting he got a nice view, an enraged Yuka begins chanting a spell while he scrambles away, shouting apologies. Through a series of intense battles, Makoto and Yuka are shown steadily growing stronger as they fight the skeleton generals, with their levels climbing from 35 and 24 all the way to 50 and 40. After much time spent fighting and resting, they eventually reach an impressive level 65 and 63, demonstrating their significant progress. A few days later, The ground is littered with the remains of the defeated skeleton generals, and having finally cleared a path, Makoto and Yuka stand before the Grand Palace, ready to move forward. Now standing confidently with Makoto at level 75 and Yuka at level 72, Yuka notes how long their training took. Makoto believes it was worthwhile because of their increased power, but Yuka brings up a pressing issue, reminding him that they have finished all their food and will be in trouble if their journey ends here. As they approach the palace, they examine a large mural on the wall depicting a war from mythology. Yuka explains that it shows a conflict between those who worship the gods and those who opposed them, and that the corpses of the losing side were turned into undead who continued to fight, revealing the origin of the undead in this world. Makoto understands that the undead are a product of war and that they must move forward to see if the story is true. Makoto opens the large double doors, and they step into a vast, pillared throne room. At the far end, seated on an impressive throne, is a massive, heavily armored skeleton king, which Makoto correctly assumes is the very same one Yuka had mentioned earlier. The skeleton king rises from its throne, revealing its immense size and a formidable shield. Makoto prepares for battle, telling Yuka to cover him and acknowledging that if the king gets past him, she will be defenseless, while she urges him not to let it break through their lines. Makoto asks about the king's stats, but Yuka reveals that, unlike the other enemies, this one has no visible stats, a detail that screams, boss fight. Undeterred, Makoto decides to test its strength and launches a powerful attack with his level 75 cheek tier flames. The flames strike the king's massive shield, which begins to glow with a powerful skill, and Makoto watches in disbelief as his attack is completely deflected. As he dodges his own reflected flames, Yuka tells him to wait while she prepares to bind the king's movements, and they both realize they cannot afford to be reckless. Yuka observes that the king is not moving and seems to only attack when they enter its territory, a departure from the mindless charging of the skeleton generals. As the king remains still behind its shield, its eyes begin to glow with a menacing power. Makoto is suddenly struck by a powerful shockwave that sends him reeling, and he is overcome by a flood of traumatic memories from his past life, reliving the crushing weight of his father's debt, the misery of power harassment and unpaid overtime, and the despair of his lonely existence. Yuka snaps Makoto out of his trance, and he realizes he was hit with a mental attack, thanking her for saving him from being in serious trouble. Just as he recovers, the skeleton king charges forward, forcing Makoto to dodge its powerful swing. Realizing his flames are ineffective, Makoto decides to try a physical attack, but as he rushes in, the king easily blocks his punch with its massive shield. The force of the blow sends Makoto flying backward across the throne room, and as he struggles to recover, Yuka shouts his name and casts her binding spell, ensnaring the king's legs. The skeleton king proves to be incredibly strong and fast, using its shield for both offense and defense, and Yuka strains to maintain her binding spell. As Makoto gets to his feet, he sees the king's eyes glow once more, signaling the same mental attack as before. Makoto knows that if Yuka loses her focus because of the mental attack, her binding spell will break and they will be defeated, so he resolves to take the king out before the attack can activate. In a moment of clarity, he realizes the mental attack was merely a bluff designed to make him hesitate, and he sees that the skeleton king is now focused on breaking free from Yuka's binding spell. Seizing the opportunity, he charges forward with a powerful, glowing fist, shouting his own name as he unleashes a decisive attack on the preoccupied king. Realizing the skeleton king's mental attack was just a bluff to make him hesitate, Makoto dodges a powerful swing as Yuka shouts a warning. He declares that it is his turn and that he will smash through the king's shield with sheer brute force. With a determined roar, Makoto lunges forward and unleashes a powerful punch directly at the center of the massive shield, putting all of his strength into the blow. He is shocked when his physical attack fails to break the shield, which only cracks slightly under the immense impact, proving just how durable it is. The skeleton king retaliates with a swing of its own shield, sending Makoto flying backward across the throne room. As he hits the ground, Yuka quickly casts a magic bullet to draw the king's attention. The spell only manages to slightly char the king's armor, and Yuka instructs Makoto to attack the main body while she restrains the shield once more with a binding formation spell. As Makoto gets to his feet, planning to circle around and find the king's core, he is surprised to see Yuka chanting another spell. She reveals that her level is high enough to cast 2 spells at once and unleashes a powerful fireball, while still maintaining her binding spell. Yuka tells Makoto to go as she launches the fireball, but the skeleton king effortlessly swats the projectile away with its free hand. Then, in a shocking move, the king hurls its massive shield like a boomerang, which tears through Yuka's binding spell and strikes her down before continuing on to wrap Makoto's arm in a strange, whip-like tendril. Makoto screams in agony as the tendril tightens around his arm, and Yuka, injured, pushes herself up to see him in trouble. He tells her they have no choice but to retreat, but she refuses, insisting that they are screwed if they fall back now. Makoto agrees, realizing that retreating would be a fatal mistake, and he begins to gather his power, vowing to use even more fire as his fist starts to glow. An intense dark energy begins to surge around Makoto's body as Yuka shouts his name in alarm, and he realizes that to fuel his power, he needs more anger. He begins to channel all the pain and frustration from his past life, recalling the misery of his father's debt, the crushing work environment, and his lonely existence, and he screams, "Screw this whole damn world," as the energy intensifies. With a final roar of, "Screw this," a massive wave of dark power erupts from Makoto, and he commands the swirling energy to converge into his hand. The resulting blast of power engulfs both him and the Skeleton King, and he screams as the raw energy burns him, pushing himself to unleash even more power. The entire throne room is consumed by a blinding flash of light, and when it clears, Makoto stands with his arm transformed into a monstrous, draconic limb made of pure dark energy, wondering what has just happened. Empowered by his new form, Makoto rushes the Skeleton King and unleashes a devastating punch that completely shatters the indestructible shield. He looks at his transformed arm in disbelief, seeing that the king's chest armor has also been destroyed, but the core he expected to find is gone, leaving only a gaping hole. The king's armor begins to crack and crumble, but to Makoto and Yuka's horror, it immediately starts to regenerate, perfectly restoring itself. Facing a seemingly immortal enemy that has no core and can regenerate from any damage, Makoto laughs in despair, admitting that he is completely out of ideas. Just as all hope seems lost, Yuka calmly tells him that she has figured out the Skeleton King's trick, and with a confident look, she declares that they might actually be able to win.